Cool.
Okay, so this is going to be a conversation about training ourselves to keep free from greed and knowing the peacefulness that comes along with generosity of spirit, and how to get more intentional and strategic with how that might look best in our lives, and learn how to renounce the attitudes that block joy, connection, and purpose in life. So first of all, what do you think are some of the qualities of greed itself, or covetousness, or avarice? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's usually kind of like selfish, like self-centered. Greed is usually like, how much can I get? What can I do for me? Yeah, it's all about like exclusionary thinking, and just how can I make my pile the biggest?
Yeah. It's like always wanting more with it never being enough, putting your self-gain ahead of moral principle, right? Living by the motto that greed is good,
Right.
And just being enslaved by it. So, and then the qualities of generosity. What are your thoughts on that? What are some of the qualities of generosity?
Well, I mean, if greed is focused on self, I always think generosity is focused on, others. Like, how can I do more for, or, how can I do something for others more than myself, or at least contribute to some capacity in selflessness, and giving to those around me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's like giving easily, joyously, and humbly without expectation of anything in return. So generosity does not mean doing something with a hidden agenda. It does not mean doing something just because you want people to think good of you. It does not mean doing something just because you want people to give you something back, right? So, okay, so one of the things is that the way society stereotypes greed, most people think of it as something extreme that does not apply to them. Like a lot of people will say it's like greed is like Ebenezer Scrooge from A Christmas Carol, or greed is Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, or some people might say greed is some of the current politicians of the day that are popular. But
you don't forget Gordon Gekko from Wall Street.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So, but we should self-examine to see how much it might sneak into our own lives, just so that we can be the kind of people that we really want to be. And because there are two paths in life. There's the path of greed and the path of generosity. And we want to know, to what degree are we committing to the path that's going to take us where we truly want to go, right? And, a lot of times greed looks like the right way, right? It looks like the right way. It looks like the smart way and everything else. But we might realize when we take the path of generosity, it raises our endorphins. It increases our connection, our sense of meaning, and our joy and fulfillment in life. So a lot of times we need to, I'm big on just truth through experience, really test out both paths and see what really gives you the emotional and inner results you're looking for. So here's some assessments we can all do together just to see where we're at with things. So imagine you're in a scientific study. $20 is meant to be split between you and a partner. If you reject the offer of the split, neither you or the partner get anything. Okay. Now imagine your partner offered you $5 of the $20. So it's not an even amount. If you agree they get 15, you get 5. Would you rather walk away with nothing, or would you accept their unfair offer? Something to think about. Something to think about. Might you think, well, I'm not getting even 50%. So if I don't get 50%, nobody gets anything. Might that be where our thought goes? Might our thought be like, nope, forget that? Well, here's the thing. In this particular situation, the partner is a poor single mother and they need the money for their sick kids. If you were being greedy and only thinking of yourself, you wouldn't consider that an uneven split might be morally acceptable in this situation, because we wouldn't even be considering the other person, right? That's the ways in which greed can prevent us from being the people we want to be. So here's something to think about when we're assessing our own levels of greed and generosity and where we're at. How hard and uncomfortable is it for us to give things away? because greed is all about internal attachment in both giving and getting. That's why it's thought of as like a miserly quality, right? Do we possess our possessions, or are we being possessed by them? It's very hard for us to separate from them. Another thing to think about is how much to you does acquiring more money or possession create a greater sense of power? For you, how much does acquiring more money or possessions create a greater sense of power in your life? Think about that. For a lot of people, they do feel like it gives them power, and that can lead to us being dependent on power coming from material things, which can lead to wanting more material things, which can lead to greed. We could also choose to have the power and prioritize the power that comes from within, the power that comes from virtuous principle, self-honesty and faith. And if we don't respect that inner power, and we don't look after getting power from the inside out, then we'll have a desperation for outer power, and that can draw us to having instincts for greed. Another thing is, how much time do you spend thinking about acquiring things? Do you spend time thinking about going to the mall, browsing catalogs, watching home improvement shows, right?
Or outdoor shows.
Or Amazon.
Well, I mean, it all depends. It all depends on, sometimes it could be a means to an end, and sometimes those things might be experiential, but something to think about. Or do we ever buy things as a way of alleviating negative thoughts and emotions? Do we ever acquire things we don't truly need because we decide that's how we're going to acquire happiness and joy, right? Instead of some of the other ways, which can draw us into greed, right? Another thing,
it's almost like stress eating.
Yeah, exactly. Just like stress eating. Another thing is, what percentage of your time or income do you devote to helping or contributing to others? Right? Is it 10%, or is it a little less? Something to think about. And we don't want to count taxes since they're mandatory. We probably want to leave out what you give to family and very close friends, since love alone accounts for why we give to them rather than the idea of generosity. There was a scientific study that showed when subjects were given money to buy things, they increased their happiness, but the next day they were back to their baseline happiness level. But then when the scientists and the researchers gave the subjects money to buy things for other people, 1 week later, there was still a residual increase in their happiness from the event, right? So science is suggesting, and research is suggesting, that a more lasting happiness comes from creating happiness for others. So let's go into this, and I'll get your thoughts on it, both of you. Why is greed or self-indulgence a bad idea? Joel, why don't you start? Why is it a bad idea to be greedy?
I mean, kind of what you alluded to earlier, where it's just never enough. I mean, that's kind of been my experience, is that, when you get on that way of thinking, you're just never satisfied. You're always looking for something different or something more. And it's just even from a selfish perspective, it's not a great way to live, because you're not really happy. You're not really content.
Yeah. So it's going to increase our personal suffering, right? Because our unnecessary possessions are really unnecessary burdens in our life. We keep getting burned by these wrong pleasures. It's like an itch you can't scratch. It's never enough, right?
Yeah, it's the illusion of that. It's you're going to find happiness or contentment or satiation or something, but it's always like the next out in front of you. You never arrive there.
Yeah, the desire for material things the disordered or excessive desire for material things can be looked at as a disease in many ways, right? Excellent. Steve, any thoughts? Why is greed or self-indulgence a bad idea?
I would say it's a bad idea because you're usually trampling other people to get what you want, right? I mean, if you think about it, the greed is the manifestation of selfishness. you are going to look at, I mean, you could say here in the States, the Black Friday craziness the day after Thanksgiving at Walmart, these idiots are trampling each other to go spend money on something because they think they're getting a good deal, but they literally will get in fist fights or knock people to the ground in order to go acquire something versus, the generosity is, like your example, right? Because you're saying, oh, would you take $5? And say, well, it depends on who the other person is, right? If it's someone that absolutely needs it, I think I would most of the time, do that unless I was in a dire situation. If it's, somebody that they're just being selfish and they want to get more out of it and they don't have the need or whatever, then I'd be like, screw you, we're both walking away with nothing just so you don't get to do that. Like, I'll spite you, I don't care, but if you need it, and so I think just that greed of trampling people, whether it's, physically or whether it's metaphorically, of just, you have to steamroll other people to get what you want at all costs. And that's a bad idea. That's, the Bible doesn't talk about that. Buddhism, Hinduism, none of that stuff talks about that being an okay thing as far as how to get stuff done.
Perfect. So, Charmaine, do you have any thoughts on why greed is a bad idea?
It focuses inward instead of outward.
Beautiful. Yeah. And in doing so, and that's very similar to Steve. So greed can be self-destructive. Too much greed can cause loss. People don't trust you. People will rip you off back, puts a target on your back. Greed can lead to moral decay, hoarding, cheating, theft. It can lead to a decay of your loyalty and dependability because self-interest becomes a major motivator, right? Think about Judas, who sold Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. That was greed that caused him to betray his best friend to the death, right? Because he thought so highly of material wealth. Greed attacks the virtues of justice. People who are really greedy aren't really concerned about those who have less. They're just concerned with them having more, right? Think about in some countries where you see these massive mansions and the surrounding community is little shanty shacks. And there's no sense of moral responsibility or evening things out for some of these people, because it's just like the greed has done funny things to them, just like drinking too much alcohol can do funny things to our sense of judgment, right? And it increases our tendency to indulge in just exchanging our sense of self for money, doing things we wouldn't normally do for money, doing things we don't believe in for money, right? So there's a lot of that. It does. Real long-term happiness will escape us. It's a setup for disappointment. We believe the things we own are ours and that we have control over them and therefore control over our lives. That's why people gain their power from material stuff. That is all an illusion, right? And we'll get into that later on, but the materialistic lifestyle never fails in the end to break all of its promises. Everything you can grab in this lifetime will crumble at the touch at some point. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So we want to be able to create that power from the inside in a more lasting way, right? Because otherwise you get rudely awakened one day to realize that nothing belongs to you. I was talking to somebody who knew somebody who was very greedy during their life. And when they were on their deathbed, they asked for the shoebox that had all of their gold bullion in it. And they hugged this shoebox full of their money and were weeping into it as they died. Like, somebody told me this story, firsthand account. It's like, is that really how we want our life story to end? Like, or would you rather hold on to somebody you care about? Or, so real long-term happiness escapes us. It's self-destructive. It increases our personal stuffing. It also makes the world worse. If everyone was greedy, what kind of world would this be? If everyone was greedy.
It would
right?
be like a constant Black Friday, a year full of Black Fridays.
I don't even think we'd be alive, because greediness, nobody would give food and support to a baby, because you'd be like, well, what's the baby going to give me back? Nothing, right? Humanity survives because of generosity.
But then
Right.
it tends to feed on itself too, though, right, Brandon? I mean, the more people start acting like that, the more they keep acting like that and just elevate it like everything else, right? Like every, any drug or alcohol or pornography or anything, it's never enough. And people that indulge in that are constantly, up in that, because it just doesn't stop. And so if you start that, like you're saying, you literally are going to look at every human being as a transaction. What am I getting in return from you? And if it's nothing, I literally will sit there and watch you waste away as long as I get what I want. And now I'm on to the next. And, it just really would, I don't think it's a straight line. It's going to go exponential in just a total decay.
Now, absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing to think about is this: there are people who will defend greed and make excuses for greed and say greed is good. However, we live in a society where products are manufactured for obsolescence. They are manufactured so that they break down quicker on people. People get promotions because they find a way to make the product so it can wear out quicker. That is the kind of society we are now living in, and that we all have to, and then at an extreme level, greed leads to war. Like, how many of the wars did not have greed as a motivator, right? Like, probably none of them. It was probably behind all of them. When it hits that boiling point, it's like, all right, well, let's just keep acquiring more. All right, there's these other people living peacefully over here. Let's just attack them, kill them, and take their stuff, Or, greed was what led people to create complex markets so that nobody understood what was going on in the hope of making a quick buck. And that caused, trades on strange pools of debt, and then caused like the economy to break down, like a house of cards. That was all greed that did it. It's like figuring out ways to trick people, right? So let's take a look at the opposite end of the equation. Why is generosity a good idea? Why is it a good idea to help others win in life, even if it slows us down a little bit? Why is it a good idea to help others win in life? Joel, let's start with you.
And did he freeze?
I think he's either really
might be frozen
or he's frozen. Okay, Steve, we'll start with you. Why is generosity a good idea?
I'd say a couple of reasons. Number one, you talk about, the two great commandments, right? Serving God or loving God and loving your fellow man, right? Well, you express your love by serving people, right? If you love somebody, you're going to do something for them. Kind of like you said, for the family and friends, right? You got to discount that a little bit, because love is going to motivate us to help them in most situations already. But when it comes to strangers, people we don't know that well, people we just encounter, the generosity is what helps people a lot when they can't help themselves, when someone gets stuck on something. I just read an account yesterday of someone who they spent a 2-week family vacation of just doing service, and they went from Idaho through Oregon, California, Utah, back to Idaho, and they got down to like some beach down in LA and just started picking up trash. And then all of a sudden, these people are like, what are you doing? They're like, oh, we're here from Idaho on vacation. Like, why are you picking up our trash? Like, we're just trying to help. And then all these other people started jumping in on the beach, and then all these people are helping. And it was just a little thing, cleaning up an area that they had no vested interest in, that little piece of real estate right there, right? They didn't own it. They weren't trying to clean it up for resale or anything like that. And they just talked about how it changed all their family members, their kids, especially the teenagers that were looking for ways to just go help perfect strangers, give them a compliment, help them change a tire, whatever it was, and then off to go. And, that's how That's how work gets done on this planet. You know, when people are in need, the heavens don't part and angels don't come down to do it all. You know, it's mortals that are imperfect trying to give an offering of service and generosity to help. And if you're truly doing it for the right reasons, you're not seeking any, you know, compensation or notoriety, and you do it and you leave. And the more you do that, the more it comes back on you when you're in a situation when you have a need.
I love
It
it.
just
I
makes the
love
world
it.
a better place.
I love it. So you nailed 2 big points. 2 big points. One, it connects us with others. Sharing is a pro-social activity and contribution and service, and it can create and strengthen friendships, right? You know, when you serve, it's hard to be lonely because in most scenarios of service, you have to get out there and help, right? And we're wired to be in association with other humans and engage in reciprocal good deeds, right? So,
Right.
and then, you know, making the world a better place. You're awakening generosity in others. So what happened is they went traveling for a couple of weeks, and they went along and just probably awoken generosity going across the country, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful idea. And with more goodness in the world, you're more likely that some of that goodness is going to circulate back to you in some indirect way,
Right.
right? There's going to be happier people all around, greater morale and productivity. I mean, the world has a lot of grabbing and self-seeking people out there. It's so refreshing when people are unselfishly trying to serve others, and it can have such an advantage and benefit to us all. Love it. Beautiful share.
Also, just the other thing too is, and this one's tough, but that feeling of helping someone else, you know, it takes the focus off of you and your problems. You know, I think, you know, in my experience, when I've really kind of been down and I feel like I'm getting beat up and nothing's going right and all that, if I stop focusing on me and I go try to help someone else, it puts things back in perspective that things aren't as bad as I think they are, or someone has it worse, or, you know, whatever, to the point that it kind of gets my brain unstuck, but it also gives me, you know, that feeling of, if I did that thing and I had pure intention with it and I was truly doing it to help somebody, and I died there and had to go face my maker, you know, that would be the thing that, yes, I went and did that thing to help somebody that was in need, whether it's a big planned out, help someone build a house, or it's a hold the door open or change a tire, jump start a car, pick up someone's groceries, you know, whatever it is. But it makes you feel good on the inside because you've done a good thing and you've made the world a better place on a local level.
Perfect. Yeah. So you bring up another point. It makes you a better person. It increases compassion. It builds your self-esteem, right? It also creates freedom from the ego. When we're too contractive, we're very ego. We're just seeing ourselves as isolated. Instead, we see ourselves in connection to the greater whole, creates a sense of ego freedom. It loosens the shackles of pride, right? Absolutely. And then also it can awaken our gratitude and amplify our gratitude, because we realize we have so much to give, if not material, with time and effort, we have so much to give. You know, Francis of Assisi once said something to the effect that it's a way to salvation and perfection of character with many hidden benefits.
That's cool.
So yeah. Joel, any thoughts on why is generosity a good idea?
Well, I mean, you guys talked about, you know, things coming back around to you, but kind of what Steve was talking about at the end there, just quality of life. Like, when you have, you know, just a sense of fulfillment and purpose and joy of just doing more than just for yourself, and just, you know, in whatever way serving. You know, I've mentioned this on many calls before, but I always think back to I think it's the Burmese people where they have the gross national happiness, but just people where it's not all this materialistic focused, you know, day-to-day interactions. It's happiness, it's goodness, it's, you know, helping others. It's when you live in that place, just to me, that is really true fulfillment. And that's, yeah, it's like the best place you can be. And it's, instead of constrictive, it's, it's reaching out. Yeah, it's expansive for a greater good. And you're part of that greater good in being of service that way.
Perfect. Love it. So it basically, you're saying, it creates a more meaningful purpose for our life, right? You can be used as a blessing for others and a channel for divine favors. And, Yogananda taught that the channel is blessed by whatever flows through it, right?
Well, even as Steve was saying, of like, the people on the beach, it has to start somewhere, and there are people out there doing good. But as you mentioned, if everybody's greedy in the world, we wouldn't be here. And so what does the inverse of that look like? If we could inspire enough people to act selflessly and, see each other, I always liken it to seeing each other as family. Like everybody you see, everybody you come across, doesn't matter who they are, we're all, they're my brother, they're my sister, they're, when you can see each other as family instead of always divisive, ways, a lot of places, a lot of politicians, a lot of sects, they like to divide things. They're like, well, you don't think the way that I think, so it's us and them. And you don't, there's class. It's like they have the money, they don't. It's race, your skin's this color, mine's this. It's et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the more that, we could inspire people to be selfless, that I think accompanies unity, and I think everything works better, and we probably realize a much happier existence all around. I mean, obviously,
Absolutely.
I know that everybody drinks the Kool-Aid, but I wish they would.
Yeah. I mean, there are people that have really, the opposite motto is you got to look out for number one. That is the motto of greed, right? Or it's me against the world. That one also is a motto behind greed. Or, you talked about human family. There are people that have an underlying motive where they're only concerned for themselves and their immediate family, and they think us four and no more, right? Like they live by that mantra. So that's kind of like the opposite that we want to be aware of, that we don't indulge in any of that, right? And it's a natural part of life to serve. The sun gives heat and light, trees give oxygen and shade. We see service. The bees are serving through their pollination for our food sources. Like service is all around us, right? And Jay Shetty in the book, Think Like a Monk, he called this a life hack for like a bad day. He said, when you're living in service, you don't have time to complain or criticize. When you're living in service, your fears go away. When you're living in service, you feel grateful, your material attachments diminish, and service is a direct path to a meaningful life. And St. John of the Cross once wrote that if you would own everything, seek to own nothing. So by that, he's kind of saying that which the ego can relinquish materially and offer up to soul consciousness is reclaimed forever in your cosmic consciousness. So I kind of look at it like that way. Whatever I give, I get to keep forever is kind of like one of the ways I look at it. And then I have this one friend, his name's Fatty Bear. He travels the world going to like spiritual retreats and stuff. And he says, the biggest secret I share with people is selfless service is the best medicine that heals everyone and everything. In losing the false identification, the true self reveals, and that is love, 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 and love alone heals all. From Fatty Bear. Anyway.
Nice.
Yeah, he says the most profound things on Facebook. We're Facebook friends now, and but he only gets like 3 or 4 likes. He's like the least popular person on Facebook, but one of the most profound people on Facebook. But that just shows, I think he's ahead of his time. Charmaine, do you have any thoughts on why generosity is a good idea?
Well, it's interesting kind of playing off what you were saying there. I think if we do look at it, like you have to look out for number one, or you're only in it for yourself, there's a limit to what you can physically accomplish. Mm-hmm. And so through generosity or through working with others, we can actually achieve greater things. Also, I think we're exposing ourselves to more things, because if we're stuck in our head and just following a path that we would design, there's a lot of things we would never be exposed to. So when you choose to invest in other people where they're at, or, get involved with other people that way with, a generosity in someone else's need, it brings you into new areas of your life, that you wouldn't necessarily have experienced, and helps you expand in that way. and who knows what you might find as a result. So it's not that that's what you're after, but it's a natural result of being generous. The greater exposure helps you grow.
Love it. Love it. Excellent. And to add to these, I'd say that there's physical benefits to it. You know, evidence suggests it can give us an immune boost when we're being generous. It can control pain and inflammation in the body. They've actually showed, right? Study, according to Dr. Richard Day in his Psychology of Happiness lecture, studies show it leads to different forms of gene expression that control inflammatory responses. It changes your immune system when you're generous. Okay. Once again, and you know, Francis of Assisi said there's many hidden benefits to it. Like science is now showing hidden physical benefit. And then I think it's also, just to summarize, it's just a direct path to happiness. If we really want to be happy, you know, there are decades of psychological studies have showed that helping other people is a far more reliable strategy for happiness than focusing on yourself, right? And Oscar Wilde once said, you know, the nicest feeling in the world is to do a good deed anonymously and have somebody find out, you know? And talking about this like it's a direct path to happiness, it's really divine selfishness that it feels better to share than to take. We can do it for ourselves, but it's more of a divine selfishness, right? And one of the ways to think of it is this. Think of the return on investment being generous versus being greedy when it comes to happiness, because what does it matter how much money we have if we're not happy? First of all, planning an act of kindness brings joy. Boom. Number two, it brings good feelings when you do it. So the actual act of generosity brings joy. Number three, the recipient gets a boost of joy, but so do others who see and witness what you did. And even as you're giving, you can see this in them. You can see the change in them. Also, here's a really important point. Everyone feels better every time they remember it. The giver, the receiver, and the witnesses. If you think back to some of the most profound acts of generosity you've witnessed in your life, you probably get a boost when you just kind of relive it and think about it, right? And then finally, like, because you're doing good things, you feel better about yourself as a person. How many people are struggling with insecurity, self-doubt, self-loathing, and all these things? And here's one way we might be able to help ourselves. If you're doing good things, you'll feel better about yourself. And then, of course, all of this goes on to create more joy in the world. So let's talk about how to express generosity of spirit, because being generous doesn't have to be a money thing. Being generous does not have to be a money thing. So one thing to think about is contemplate just what forms of human suffering are you most familiar with? When have you felt lost or in need? For example, maybe you had a past alcohol addiction, or poor health struggles, or relationship hardships, or career hardships, right? So one route of service is to help and contribute by healing the pain that we know best. And there's a variety of different ways to do that. So you might think, you know, how might I use my knowledge and skills to make a difference? Maybe at the very least, I can share my story or my example to help inspire hope in others so they don't feel alone if they're going through what I did. Maybe I can be a coach, a mentor, a sponsor, or a guide for those in a similar state. You know, maybe I can just create content to share with the world that might uplift them, right? So we can kind of take an inventory of that. You know, like if you're a musician, you might serve through your music, right? If you're a coder, you might serve through doing coding for a website. And, you know, there's many different ways you can serve, right? And then you can also make a list of material things you could give away. You know, you could say, what do I have but don't use? Maybe there's a whole bunch of clothing I'm not using, and I can get all that stuff and maybe give it away. Or you can ask yourself, what can I live without? Now, when asking yourself what to give, here's a little fine line. If it's being used for a virtuous purpose, then it may not be something you should give, because you may need it to help more people in the long run. In this case, it's not yours to give because you might need to be used by a higher power to help those in need. and you may need this to help those in need, right? So that's something to think about. And then also we want to think about who could you give to and in what ways. So think about, how can I serve those at home? How can I serve my friends? How can I serve those at work? How can I serve those in my local community? Maybe perhaps a group or an existing charity or a religious or community group, or a help out at the school or something. How can I serve those in the greater world community? You know, could I create an online way of serving them, or maybe work for a hotline for teens or people who are suicidal, or travel and help, right? Like this is what your friends did, Steve. So those are some things to, and here's some stories I'll tell you about in ways in which, examples in which this played out. And as I tell you these stories, I want to know if these stories make you feel happier. Okay, both of you, or anyone who's watching the recording. First of all, there was a really elderly old lady. She's literally probably in like her last month of life, and she was having breakfast with her son. And somebody noticed this and just went over and paid their bill, right? So also, one person I know, they went over to visit a neighbor. One of their neighbors, their husband passed away. They were married for so long. And she just went over to visit a neighbor and brought flowers and groceries to help her out and give her a boost during the grieving process. You know, there was another guy I know, a guy, Jim, he was at a McDonald's on Lakeshore in Mimico in Toronto. And, you know, he was having a bad day. He was dressed up in his suit and tie and everything else and looking very prosperous and affluent, as he always does. And, you know, there was a lady in front of him in line who looked just so down and out. Okay. And then she turned around to him. She's like, "What are you ordering?" Like as if he's some sort of menu expert. And he was like, "Oh, I'm getting the McChicken." So then anyways, she places her order. She hands him a McChicken. She's like, "You don't need to order anything. I got it for you." And he was shocked. He's like, "What?" He tried to give her money and she refused. And she's like, "I've just always wanted to do this for someone." She's like, "I don't have a lot of money, but I still wanted to do it. And I hope you'll do the same someday." And then she just kept repeating, "I just always wanted to do this." You know? And when he told me this story, you know, it cheered him up, right? And it cheered me up to hear that some random lady did this, right? Another time, early morning in a Tim Hortons, some guy was passed out, looked a little down on his luck. So somebody else just wrote him a little note that says, "You matter," with a little envelope of cash for him when he woke up, right? So these are some just different random ways we could do it. So what are some ideas for random acts of kindness, or any acts of kindness or contribution that maybe something you've seen or witnessed, or some thoughts you have? Why don't we just share some ideas on things we could do to express generosity of spirit? Steve, you want to start?
Yeah. So we went, you know, my cousin passed away a couple months ago, and we went down for the memorial service last month. And so my aunt lost her husband 5 years ago, and then just lost her only son. And I didn't know it. My brothers had gotten there before me, and they were doing some stuff in the yard. So we went in and helped finish some brickwork. We pulled all the stuff out of the shed, helped organize it, decided what they were going to get rid of. You know, and for me, it was really cool because I was helping family members. I was hanging out with my brothers that I haven't seen for quite a while. Got to see a couple of my cousins. And so it didn't feel like work, right? But I know it meant a lot, you know, to her in that time. I also heard of someone that, you know, they'd had a death in the family and someone showed up. How can we help? You know, there's really nothing you can do. They went into the guy's room, pulled out his dress shoes, shined his dress shoes for the funeral so that his shoes were shined, right? This guy's not going to think to stop and do that himself. He's not going to take the time, you know, and all the stuff that he's doing given his situation. And I heard that, and that just made me think, you know, sometimes when we're trying to give service to people that are really in difficult circumstances. You ask what you can do, and most of the time they can't even process what you could do, because what they're focused on is their loss or their pain, and there's nothing that you could do to pull that away, and so they can't think of something, and this other person just went in and shined their shoes for them. And so I think it's important in those emotionally charged times when we're trying to render service to maybe just act, find something. Maybe you go clean someone's bathroom so they don't have to because they've got company coming in, or whatever it is, take the kids away, go walk the dog, something, to just do that. And I think it's hard because a lot of times as people trying to give service, you don't know what to say or you don't know what to do. And we just ask, what can I do? Oh, nothing. And it's kind of this, right? It's this dialogue that we could probably write out the same that always happens. But, I think things like that are just really impactful for people, especially when they're in a really difficult situation that, you lose someone to death or, something like that, or a job loss. It's not usually a 24-hour turnaround, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. And so just taking action and finding something to do. I like that shoe shining thing, because that just reminds me, just go do something.
Yeah.
Something small will have a big impact.
Brilliant. Charmaine, any thoughts on any ideas you can think of to contribute on acts of kindness?
Kind of like Steve was saying, I mean, I think people tend to refuse help, and sometimes they just feel guilty accepting it, but sometimes they don't know what to ask for. But I think if you look for people's needs and give in a way that you see that they're needing, not always what you think you would need, but how, you see that they're needing, people appreciate things like that, especially if it's something practical, because not only does it give to them, it lets them feel seen.
Mm-hmm.
And, like Steve was talking about with, someone who's going through the loss of a loved one, there's lots of people there at the very beginning, but continuing to remember where they are and what they've been through recently. And, a month down the road, they're still processing that. The rest of the world has moved on. And so I think remembering people in those times and looking for ways to just do more to even reach out and connect and just be there and be present, I think sometimes is a really good thing to think about. Because I do think in the beginning it's easy. A lot of people are there. There's a lot of activity, but it's once things get quieter, I think it gets harder.
Yeah, perfect. Love it. Joel, any thoughts?
Yeah, sorry, my phone died earlier and the charging cable doesn't charge very quickly. There was a Netflix series I watched maybe a year ago. I think it was on Netflix, called The Kindness Diaries, that I thought was really cool. It was just this guy that relied on the kindness of strangers, and he would go around. He went all over the world. He would pay people to just rely on helping others, the kindness of strangers, and he would always have a meal at somebody's house to take him in or give him a place to stay, and he wouldn't ask for it.
Okay, cool. Your connection's breaking up a little bit. It's a little choppy. Oh, Joel's breaking up a little bit. Okay, so Joel mentioned The Kindness Diaries. This guy was just going around, acts of kindness. I guess that show's on TV somewhere. I will throw some other ideas out there. One could be paying the highway toll for the person behind you. Yeah. Picking up garbage in your community is a great one. Giving a kind word to a stranger even, or making them smile in just some small way, right? Maybe consider donating a few hours per week to volunteering in your community for various programs for mentally or physically disadvantaged people or the elderly, or tutoring or voter registration, or even helping animals rehab, or walkathons that raise money, and different fundraisers you could contribute to, and things like Habitat for Humanity, and hotline counseling for people in need, like suicide hotlines. You might think, I don't got the skills, but I believe they may train you, or at least get you up to par on that as well. Like Big Brother, Big Sister programs, like things like that, hosting exchange students, feeding hungry animals, like extending our sympathies beyond our own species to the less evolved forms of creation and comforting them in the same way we're comforted by the higher beings, or we could also, donate to your local church or tithe to help them with the good they're doing, or sponsoring a child from a poor country, giving people random thoughtful gifts like cooking healthy food or bringing over some gifts for a friend who's sick right now could be something, or anybody. Or, another thing is encouraging others by giving them something they can give away, right? So when you give somebody something, give them 2 portions, one for them and one for them to give away. So in the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, his mom would do this to awaken the generosity of spirit in him. Okay. It reinforces that it's a good idea to be generous because he kept, in a real life way, experiencing the joys of giving. But she would say, here's 2 portions, one for you and one you should give to somebody. Right.
That's
and so
cool.
he got
I haven't heard that before. That's cool.
Well, Tony Robbins once told a story about his son, Jarek. And I guess the grandma had given Jarek like a whole ton of balloons and Jarek was only 4. And so Tony Robbins thought, instead of keeping them all for yourself, you don't need them all. So they went to the old folks' home. And this little 4-year-old was giving balloons to seniors. And the seniors gave him back love and admiration and appreciation. Right? So that reinforcement will then create that tendency moving forward in life for generosity of spirit. Think about the effect of that on helping raise our next generation versus considering, oh, you only look out for family, it's us against the world. That's kind of a different way of going about things. So, and then, at the very least, you can always pray for people.
Yeah.
Or do meditation for them on their behalf. But there's tons of ideas. So hopefully, whether you rewatch the recording and make some ideas for yourself and decide you're going to do this as like a little bit of an experiment in your life, those are some great ideas. Now, let's talk about some of the causes of greed. 1, believing that money is a reflection of our value as a person. This drives people to greed because it just raises the stakes for money in your life, right? If we have money, we're good. And if we don't have money, we're not as good. So that can lead to a lot of pressure. So people need to realize, like, how is that completely false, right? Taking pride in our material wealth, right? Like it doesn't really say anything about us. It's a terrible scorecard for our success in life because it can be acquired through unethical or evil means, acquired by luck or random chance.
You go rob a bank right now and get a little bit of money.
Yeah, and then
you may get free TV, healthcare, and weight room, and some new friends if you get caught. But like to your point, you can, if you're going to be unethical or illegal, you can go make money really quick.
Yeah, exactly.
That part's easy.
Yeah.
So
I think another reason is fear-based thinking, scarcity mentality. So negative faith about the future, right? So people that lack positive faith and they haven't learned the skill of how to cultivate positive faith, which would come from the knowing conversation or the knowing video that we did previously. They will feel that we're all on a cosmic bus and there's nobody at the wheel. And so you need to grab onto anything and everything you can to gain control as we continue in our cosmic collision course, right? So it's kind of like, so if people are living with that mentality, they will feel insecure. It's kind of like a spiritual sickness, and they're trying to find their security in anything physical because they may not believe in the non-physical, right? And then I think the third main cause is thoughtlessness, the undisciplined pursuit for more, just not thinking. So sometimes the greedy hoard more than their own share. Like, think about all the toilet paper at the beginning of COVID, right? Do you really need like 5-year supply of toilet paper in your closet right now while others have none? But I don't think these people were bad intentioned. They just weren't thinking in many ways. I would give them benefit of the doubt on that, Whereas if we're wise and we pause and think about the welfare of the world and see things as they are and remember that we are a part of a community, and happiness for self at the expense of the community will not work out in the end. is something important. Charmaine, do you have any thoughts about the causes of greed?
I think fear a lot of times is one of the big causes.
Yeah, absolutely. Fear drives us to vices very quickly, right? And not wise caution. Wise caution or healthy fear, I just call it wise caution, is different. We need to be prudent on what could go wrong, but it's this excessive or disordered fears and insecurities that are irrational that drive people to greed, right? So let's talk about the roadblocks or obstacles or self-destructive attitudes. So some people will exaggerate the sacrifice here on being generous. They assume you have to give up everything, but it's not wrong to have things if you're using things for good, right? We can use our homes to foster a sense of community and have people over. It doesn't mean you have to give away your house, you don't have to give away everything. So sometimes people will dismiss it and just exaggerate the sacrifice. Another one is defeatism. People make excuses in advance. There's no way I can live with less. I simply can't. It's impossible, right? When, and it's similar to the response of the rich young man in the Gospel of Matthew, who just couldn't give away his wealth and take the path of virtue. So that can be one thing. Or thinking we have nothing to give. Remember, it doesn't have to be a money thing. Giving indiscriminately can be something that kind of blocks us here. Like, for example, we got a couple people entering. For example, many film stars in the 1930s gave away money just very indiscriminately. And several of them died in poverty. Right? So there should be some sort of thoughtfulness to this. If we treat all physical things carelessly, then it's not the most respectful thing even to the creator. We should honor the physical things, but just honor them in proper proportion and be grateful for the things that come to you and not treat them all with disdain, and share it with others in a spirit of gratitude to the supreme giver. But share it with good sense, right? Or giving the wrong type of help is another thing of giving indiscriminately. The feel-good hormones released with helping others can lead people to like enabling. Like if somebody's really doing something wrong in their life and we try to diffuse it and affirm a wrong attitude in the spirit of helping and getting high off it, we might be just prolonging the pain. We might be helping people with their excessive desires instead of their needs. And also we don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul in many ways. Like that can be a way we can do it. Another thing that holds us back is having giving go to our head and getting an ego out of it. Right? So we got to remember that whatever we give was given to us. Like we came into this world penniless and naked. So everything we've acquired is on the profit side of things. So whatever we've given was given to us. We shouldn't let too much of it grow our ego, right? And not wanting to give is another thing that'll hold us back. And that comes from spiritual amnesia, just being way too worldly, justifying the suffering of other people, just saying, well, it's their karma, they should suffer, or, we need poor people and blah, blah, or we don't want to deal with surplus population, so other people should suffer and everything else. So, and then a big one is people will look back on generous things they did way in the past and always use that to pat themselves on the back and be like, well, I did do this thing this one time, but then they use that as a substitute for consistency of generosity or being generous in future. That's a big one, actually.
Janet Jackson wants to know, what have you done for me lately?
Okay, there you go. Yeah, what have we done for generosity lately, right? Absolutely. And then sometimes people get last minute resistance. And I think for last minute resistance, just remember that, everything you can possibly own will one day leave you. It will fall apart. You'll die and have to give it back anyways. If you give it now, you'll get a far-reaching return on investment. If you don't give it, it'll be pried from your hands one day anyway. Yeah. Right.
Well, I think, Brennan, maybe one thing that we didn't talk about too, reasons why people don't, is convenience, right? Maybe I had plans and someone reaches out and needs help, or I become aware of their thing, but oh man, I really want to go mountain biking, or I really want to go down to the lake water skiing, not helping that person move, or, you know, building the shed, or, you know, whatever. And, you know, sometimes I've had times where, you know, I've put off stuff I've wanted to do, go help, and I've had times where I couldn't, or other people were dependent on me for something we'd planned. And, you know, but a lot of times, you know, people want to serve conveniently. They want to serve on their own schedule. They, you know, if it's, well, that doesn't work for me, you know, that day of the week or this time slot. And I think that's where just the spontaneous generosity and giving comes in, right? Holding the door open, helping someone with their groceries, complimenting something, you know, someone even, you know, using their name. You know, I try to use my waiter or waitress's name at a restaurant as much as I can, you know, or I talk to somebody. You know, I flew out of the Eugene, Oregon airport when we had first, we weren't even moved here yet. I came to visit and I flew home, and I go through and I was listening to this TSA agent, and she was calling everyone by their name, and she was so upbeat and happy and everything. And I couldn't believe it. And I got up there and I said, I didn't think the federal government hired nice people. I've never met like such a nice, you know, employee like you. And she's like, would you fill out a comment card for me? And like, I absolutely will. So I go through security and everything, and I didn't catch your name, so I asked someone else, and I took the time and I wrote out this card. Like, she didn't have to be that way, right? It wasn't, it's not super busy, it's not JFK, you know, whatever, but she was so pleasant and upbeat and happy, and, oh, where are you going, what are you doing? And it just made standing in line so much more pleasant for everyone. When, you know, most people won't do that. Think about every time you go to the DMV, right? They're like, why are you here?
Yeah.
So that you have a job and I can register my stupid car that I own myself. But, you know, little things like that just make a big difference. And I spoke to a lady today named Stacy that was really helpful, you know, and at the end of it, I thanked her, I used her name and just said, you know, I really appreciate, you know, the information you gave me today. You know, it really helped me out. And, you know, and it's a little thing, you know, a compliment on your dress or the color of your hair. I always go up to people with bright colored hair. I say, man, I love that color of blue. That looks so good on you. And then I take my hat off and say, I tend to notice people with cool hair colors.
I love it. I love it.
Have you guys seen that video from Ryan Estes? Like, I'll never forget that cup of coffee.
No, tell us about it.
I will share it with you guys. It is so good, but he's traveling right before Christmas and his dad wasn't doing well. And just in the airport, he's getting a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
The way this person interacted, you've seen it.
Yeah, I remember it now. Yeah.
It is so good. I will share it in our group chat.
Yeah, it's very cool.
It's really good. But I was thinking, you know, whenever you were explaining some of how we should give, and like there's times we should and times we shouldn't, and it might be enabling to some people. And so we have to use a lot of discernment in that. And I think I've mentioned before, I read the book Principles by Ray Dalio. And one of the things he was talking about in there was how each person in the family has chosen things that are meaningful to them. And that's the area in which they give. And because of, I'm sure, the money that he has, there's people coming to him all the time and wanting money. And while he may have the means to give, I think it brings into, you know, consideration the discernment you should use in giving as well. Because most of those, you know, people who are coming and asking for money, you don't really know what it's about, or you don't really know where that money is going. And you don't have the time to go and look into everything or invest in everything or see whether you're really helping or, you know, how that's impactful. But I think people should be able to choose areas in which they have a passion about and that they can focus in. And that's where, you know, they can focus their giving. And some of the smaller things, kind of like what Steve was saying, you know, helping someone with their groceries or whatever, that's smaller and those are easy to give in the moment. And while they're very impactful to that person, on a larger scale, I think it can get a lot harder. And, sometimes some things require more consideration than others. And I certainly was in a marriage where I wasn't helping anyone. It came across more enabling because I was trying to keep, I didn't want to be harmed by his behavior. So I think it is hard sometimes to be discerning and to know where it's helpful and where it's not. But along with that generosity, we also have to keep in mind, like I said, the potential consequences and find, helpful ways in which to give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And my thing is, when in doubt, I give, right? It should be very obvious, but when in doubt, because otherwise the canceling energy and the doubting energy can grow too much momentum, right? So when in doubt, I give. And I also think that, when I can, I give wisdom instead of material. Because if you just give material help all the time, sometimes that keeps people a slave to their circumstances. And it is wisdom that can elevate them and help them transcend in life. So
and then they choose whether or not they're taking the benefit of it.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you got to give material help and it's needed and necessary in the moment, but there should be some sort of plan to be able to give wisdom for whatever wisdom deficiency they might be experiencing in life and how that might be able to help them out. It's like, you give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. So the way to teach somebody how to fish is figure out what wisdom is most beneficial that you can pass along to somebody, rather than just giving handouts all the time. Sometimes handouts are needed. Absolutely. There's desperate. We don't have time. We just got to get this done now. But there should be some sort of longer term plan as well. Ideally, I think. That's just my humble opinion. I could be dead wrong on all this. Joel, do you have any thoughts?
I think the wisdom thing is cool because, sometimes, like, I've had this conversation recently with someone, but no, actually it was with Charmaine and Patty last week. We were talking about sometimes I get frustrated when I see people that appear to be idiots or whatever, like, what is wrong with you? Why did you do that? Why would you do it that way? Whatever. And, we talked about the blessing of the training that we've had, of going through Tony Robbins, of other stuff that we've gone through, of running this for a year and a half. And, before that, Tony Robbins said so many things that I went, why couldn't I put it in those words myself? Why could I not conceptualize that life happens for me, not to me? Because up until that point, it kept happening to me. And as soon as I heard that, this light bulb went off and I'm like, holy crap. Okay. And then another one and another one. But, people don't know how to pull themselves out. If they did, they would already do it. Most of the time, they don't have the skill set, or they don't have the lesson or that one tool. And if you can help, by teaching, by supplying that wisdom, that can be really impactful of, just one little thing I saw in this training that I did for preparedness. And the lady said, okay, you take a little Ziploc plastic bag. How would you use that? And then we start throwing out ideas. Okay, well, how would a little kid use it? Like, I don't know. You start saying crap. And she said, yeah, someone asked this little 4-year-old kid, what would you do with this plastic bag in an emergency? And he said, I'd save my goldfish with it. And she's like, no one else ever says anything like that, right? And her whole point was, you start thinking differently, and service changes the way you think. The more you serve, the more your vision expands.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Outward, right? Just like Charmaine said, where it's not always going inward. And so I think that, wisdom is great. I shared a couple of things with someone today on a phone call, on this really good talk we were having. And, it was just a couple things I've shared before, just little things like Tony Robbinisms type things. And she went, yeah, that's really cool. I really like that. I kind of think that way. And so I like your thing of wisdom. I hadn't really thought about that so much as more doing something physical,
Well, and you could also think about how you've been giving that gift on every call that we've publicly posted, Steve, since we started this group. You've been doing that, actually. I'm going to go through, as we wrap up here, I'm just going to go through some helpful attitudes to have moving forward.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yes, perfect. Yes, please.
Sorry, and before I got to really cut off for someone to go back to, but so what Charmaine was saying about having some discernment with knowing what people need, it's interesting because, you know, Tony Robbins tells a story about, you know, he wanted to attend a conference when he was young and didn't have the money for it and went to a family member to be like, hey, can you pay for this for me? It's a drop in the bucket for you. And the guy was like, no, I'm not buying it for you. You got to earn it. And he was like flabbergasted, but he did earn it, and it was that much more meaningful to him. So it's interesting, but at the same time, you got to be second guessing something. Then it's almost like you put up a barrier to actually helping people. But then again, you know what, Brandon, what you were saying with, you know, giving wisdom, the thing I got cut off trying to share what would be helpful homeless is something that's about the people that are in a good place financially, stability wise. I figure like they've got a decent shot. At least I always want to try to help the people that, you know, kind of had the rug pulled out from under them and just don't even have hope. And so for them, one thing that I've found is that even just taking somebody to lunch or dinner, be like, hey, you know, can I take you out for some food? And just like, a lot of times they really just, they don't have anybody to talk to. Like they don't have any friends, people ignore them. Like socially, it's a really, you know, not reassuring place to be in when you're just kind of ignored by society. And just having the ability to talk and like share your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You know, really quickly the other day, I was at a school for one of my kids' functions, and there was this little kid that was somebody sat him next to the table next to me. They're like, all the parents came, but I guess his parents didn't come. And so he started talking. So anyway, somewhere in there, I think it's just great to reach people, to give them wisdom, even if it's just listening, but just to always be receptive to ways of.
I really love how you talked about the whole, you know, somebody didn't give money for a seminar because they didn't want to deprive them of the strength and motivation they would get from earning the money for themselves. Beautiful example of, you know, not giving materially, but giving something greater. So I'm just going to wrap up with going over some of the key takeaways of like the healthiest attitudes for us to have moving forward. One is to practice healthy detachment. See nothing as yours. We don't get to keep any of our possessions anyways. Okay. See nothing as yours. Truly. It's all on temporary loan. Okay. Nothing you gain in this world will be yours permanently. Another one is remember the kind of person you want to be. We keep whoever we become. And that is ultimately shaped by what we give, not what we take and grab for ourselves. Wealth can only be used. It can't be held forever. So we might as well use it for the greatest payoff for humanity and realize a greater return through generosity rather than just hoarding, right? And all of the spiritual teachers have in one way encouraged us to do this, whether it was Buddha, you know, Jesus said it's more blessed to give than receive. Francis of Assisi talked about Lady Poverty. Yogananda talked about how nothing here is really yours anyways. It's always temporary and death will take it away from you. Swami Vivekananda said, you know, true happiness consists in killing selfishness. World is selfishness. Unselfishness is God. Be unselfish and you will merge in God, right? Sri Rami Yogi, someone wanted to give him something and he didn't accept it. He stated, all I want is your love. He wouldn't even receive stuff, right? So look to the end. Would you rather know that you lived in a spirit of competition with humanity or a spirit of generosity and cooperation with humanity? And make an experiment of generosity. Like, don't just intellectually decide it's a good idea. try it out. Try to give happiness and see if you get happiness. Try to create a good day for someone else and see if it makes a good day for you, right? So, and focus on the rewards of this, you know? And then I would say, to close, I would say, you know, that with this, the earth itself is a toyland of of childish things. The earth itself is a toyland of childish things. The world is a forum of sharing, not a toy room to plunder. Everything in this existence is God's. It's all God's playthings and toys. God gave them all form, or the creator brought them into form and brought them into existence. We grab them and play with them like little children, but they all belong to God, and it's God's toy room, and we got to leave the toy room and leave all these toys behind. But we're like kids trying to cling on to it, acting like it's ours. They're all on loan. We got to give them back. You might as well give them back sooner and experience the joys of generosity rather than wait for the grim reaper to pry them from your cold, dead fingertips, you know? And we can give, generosity can be so versatile. It doesn't have to just be material goods and money. It could also be time, service, and caring. And generosity creates a bouquet of smiles and makes a soul beautiful. All right. Like, you know, by fitness model standards, people would say Mother Teresa is the last thing you would see on the front of a fitness magazine. But when you look into that twinkle and sparkle in her eyes and all the love and caring and service she gave in her life, you can see that soul beauty radiating from within. You know, the world is won by those who are most willing to let it go with healthy detachment, because as you give it all up, you can have it all. And God's given us everything. When you give, you are more like God than at any other time. All right. And that is the importance of generosity of spirit. It helps us, helps our souls evolve and self-realize. So I got to get running. Any other quick final thoughts? Super quick. Nobody? You guys are all good? Okay. Great chat out there today. It's an honor and pleasure to give this conversation to anyone who might watch the recording later on. And we hope in some small way we've inspired you to just do something nice and kind and just see how well it works out for other people. We're all in this together. Let's do friends forever, enemies for never. Fist bump on 3. We're all out. Okay, we're here to be a friend for everybody. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Friends forever, enemies for never.
Love you guys. Have a good
Great
week.
You too. Take care.